Well, as the Roberts Court has turned its shadow docket into a tool to advance Donald Trump's Project 2025 agenda, and as the United States Senate Judiciary Committee reduces itself into effectively a rubber stamp for the confirmation of increasingly extreme henchmen for Donald Trump's personal agenda, we are at a crossroads in American democracy. Thankfully, Americans are starting to fight back, and federal judges and former federal judges are standing up to rise the alarm, sound the alarm against the unfolding constitutional crisis that this situation presents to our people in this perilous moment. And today we are so thrilled to be joined by two of these former federal judges who are standing up to sound the alarm about the crisis to our constitutional order that this moment presents. Former Judge John Jones from the Middle District of Pennsylvania and Circuit Judge Andre Davis from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. You are former federal judges appointed by presidents of different parties. Judge Jones appointed by President George W. Bush, Judge Davis appointed by President Obama, but who have come together in this moment of deep constitutional crisis to sound the alarm from your station, having been there in the federal courts, served in these life-tenured seats, understanding the importance of judicial independence as a guardrail against this type of abuse of government power that we are watching unfold. Thank you for joining us here today on Court Accountability Action Legal AF on the Midas Touch Media Network. Please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. We're going to dive into a really important conversation with these two brave former federal judges. First of all, maybe we'll start with you, Judge Davis. Why was it so important to you in a moment like this to use your stature to sound your voice about what is happening in this time in our history?
Well, I was so delighted to learn of the emergence of the Article 3 coalition. Working on public education, lifting up the public's knowledge about the importance of our constitutional principles, the imperative of judicial independence, the important role of the rule of law, has been a lifelong passion of mine, even when I was an active judge. And so to learn recently that judges appointed by a number of different presidents had come together to lift our voice, to enhance public education, to push back against misinformation and false information was something that I immediately thought I wanted to be associated with. And I'm so happy to make new friends and reacquaint myself with old friends in this work.
Judge Davis, thanks so much. And I forgot to mention what you brought up. You're part of a formal coalition, a bipartisan coalition of former judges organized by a wonderful C3 organization, a nonpartisan organization called Keep Our Republic. And this coalition is called the Article 3 Coalition. Judge Jones, you're also a member of this coalition, represent the sort of the other side of the bipartisan nature of this coalition. As we've seen from other experiences with authoritarianism around the world, it is essential that we build these cross-ideological coalitions, use our professional associations, find folks like you who have the experience, the credentials, the credibility to speak out from your experience. Why was it important for you to join a coalition like this in this moment?
Well, similar to my colleague, I left the bench to take on a college presidency in 2021, and I felt rather liberated at that time, unfettered by the code of conduct that really mandates appropriately that judges don't wade into these things and extrajudicial statements. I did do op-eds, and I made myself available for interviews to talk about judicial independence, to talk about the rule of law. I've been particularly concerned about the safety of judges. That really goes back to my service on the Judicial Security Committee of the Judicial Conference of the United States. So this was a perfect opportunity with great synergy to join almost 50 of my colleagues as former judges. I think there's power in numbers, And we all have a similar goal, I think, if not the same goal, which is really to talk about the business of judging and the third branch at a time when I think there are really unprecedented attacks against the judiciary. Judges have been criticized since the beginning of the Republic, but this is something darker and different, I think. And because our colleagues who remain on the bench are sort of gagged by the code of conduct, again, not inappropriately, I think it's incumbent upon us to speak out.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought up the threats to judges that we've seen escalate to kind of unfathomable degrees. I think I read a statistic that showed a 327% spike in online threats to judges. Obviously, we've heard these stories about pizzas being delivered to judges' homes in the name of Daniel Androl, the murdered son of federal judge Esther Salas in New Jersey. I was a Senate Judiciary Committee staffer working on legislative reforms in the wake of the horrific attack on Judge Salas and her family. And we were able to work in bipartisan fashion to improve financial disclosure and other reporting requirements to protect judges' information, to protect judges from these types of attacks. And now it seems like, as much like you, kind of coming together in a bipartisan fashion from your former judge position, active judges from presidents appointed by presidents of both parties stood up to, impose injunctions or apply the law to stop Donald Trump's policies. And we've seen this wave of attacks unleashed, accusations of judicial coups and these, the threats and the pizza boxes that I mentioned. And we're not seeing that same type of bipartisan support emerge for judges kind of under this type of duress right now. And in fact, we're seeing so many elected Republicans turning away from this crisis and going on to confirm dangerous judges like Emil Bovee, who I know, Judge Jones, you formally voiced opposition to. So how do you think we should kind of confront a challenge like this in a moment of such intense partisan polarization, including around the courts right now?
Judge Davis, go ahead if you want to.
Well, you didn't mention impeachment among the incredible list of threats, dangerous rhetoric that's out there, including that coming from highly placed elected and non-elected officials. And it is so dangerous, it is so inappropriate, and it so corrodes respect for the courts, to say nothing of put the actual lives, as we saw in Judge Salas's case, the lives of judges and their families at risk. And so every sector of the legal community and of the broader community, including retired judges, lawyers, need to speak out in opposition to this dark, dark rhetoric that is being used to castigate judges who simply are doing their job. That's all the judges are doing, is doing the job that they've sworn an oath to do. And so the Article 3 coalition has an important role to play in speaking out against this kind of rhetoric and this kind of behavior.
And I agree. The business of judging is pretty straightforward, believe it or not. And it's being distorted. And the difference between now and I think any other time in history is, I'm sure presidents of the United States and attorneys general privately railed against judges. We know you can go back to the 1930s with Franklin Roosevelt and the court packing scheme and so forth. But what's different is, we have thought leaders, elected officials, such as the president and his attorney general and others, who are calling judges lunatics, kooks, socialists, that they're anti-American. I don't think the vast majority of Americans, 99.9%, will act out or do anything in response to that. But what this is kind of a dog whistle. And it appeals to, the kind of fringe element that's unbalanced and could do harm to a judge. I happen to know Esther Salas. I served within the Third Circuit. The next state over from New Jersey where she is. I can't imagine a more horrific thing to happen. Just once, I'd love to hear an elected official, a thought leader say, we need to stop this. We need to stop sending these pizzas, which as Esther herself said, Judge Salas said, it sends a message to the recipients. We know where you live, and you can end up like Danny Andrew. Starkly, simply, that's what this is all about. And I feel passionately that we shouldn't have judges looking over their shoulder. I don't think it's cowing them or changing their decisions. But I also wonder, and I've said this a number of times recently, if this keeps up, these kind of unprecedented attacks on judges, who's going to want to be a federal judge? You wonder. It was the highest honor of my life to become a federal judge. I look at good people today, and I really wonder whether they want to buy into that kind of a risk-filled lifestyle. And most judges will tell you they worry about their families first. They signed up for some risk. I had threats. Other judges have had threats, but this is a bad, bad climate.
Yeah. And just to connect those dots there, in case it's not clear, I think it's pretty clear, right? They fear for their families. And that's the point of the threats and intimidation, which are intended to shape outcomes, right? They want to intimidate these judges to reach rulings that are consistent with their political agenda.
Well, the other point, quickly and simply, is that unlike 10, 20 years ago, when I took the bench, you can find out where judges live very easily. And I know legislation was passed to try to cover some of the personally identifiable information, but it's not perfect. We all know that. And anybody can find anybody in the United States today. And that really ratchets up the risk level.
Yeah, it's interesting to have this conversation. Such a fascinating conversation. Thank you both for joining me today to dig into this stuff. But it's really interesting to think about this in the context of the years leading up to it, right? And I think a lot about the year-end report that Chief Justice John Roberts issued last year. I don't know if you recall that report, but it was in the aftermath of these 2 years of real scandal and corruption, stories that had engulfed the court, stories about conflicts of interest and dark money and big special interests that had influenced the court, and failures to disclose, the gifts that had been handed to justices by the big special interests with business before the court, and big questions about the court's transparency and ethics in resolving those issues. And Robert spent the bulk of that report sort of dealing with those criticisms and sharply rejecting the notion that actually it's even fair at all to criticize judges for this type of behavior. And then really interestingly, in the last part of that report, he turns to what I think very clearly is a prediction about what he sees the next year bringing, which is contestations over constitutional power and the prospect of defiance by President Trump's administration of Supreme Court orders trying to constrain him. And so here we have, I think, in those two, developments, a lot of why we are here in this moment, right? I think the courts, and I'd love your feedback on this because I'm just sort of working it out, but it's almost like the court's unwillingness to tackle head on questions about ethics and transparency that the public had about the justices themselves. It's resort to practices like the shadow docket, where it's increasingly, not just explaining itself in reaching orders and rulings that affect millions and millions of people. It's contributing to its own, the diminution in its own loss of political faith, right? Public faith. And we saw just in Gallup this week that the court's public faith is lower than it has ever been, under 40%. And meanwhile, we have got, an authoritarian movement that I think very clearly recognizes the public weakness of this court and is going to exploit it by leveling these types of attacks. And so I sort of just would love your impressions on that take and your thoughts about, what John Roberts, I think in particular, who, as the Chief Justice of the United States, sits at, controls not just the Supreme Court, but the entire federal judiciary, and has a really important public role to play in how we navigate forward here. How we should be thinking about these questions. That's a lot, but I appreciate it.
Well, that is a lot, but I would highlight one of the things you said, Alex, the polling showing the distrust of the Supreme Court in particular among Americans is very concerning. I mean, what courts have what is the coin of the realm in the judiciary is the people's trust in the integrity and probity of the judges at the highest level. And I know, as we all know, the Supreme Court has a lot of work to do to restore the lost trust as a result of some of the reporting that's been out there. I think that the Article 3 coalition can help in that way. And one of the things that I hope that we do as a coalition is to give people a chance to hear other voices within the judiciary, though retired, though former judges. We are still part of the judicial family. And I hope that people will hear us talk about the rule of law, the importance of compliance with judicial ethics, and begin to restore that trust. Judicial independence is one side of a two-sided coin. And the other side of that coin is accountability. And the people have a right to expect judges and courts in this country to show some accountability. And what you've alluded to just now brings that to the fore. Now, one way judges and courts show accountability, there are many ways, but one way is through reasoned decision-making. And that's what makes some of the rhetoric and some of the attacks on judges individually and on courts so painful to me. Judges have an obligation, consistent with their oath, to explain the reasons for their decisions. And the truth of the matter is, both at the Supreme Court level and in the lower federal courts, if you look at 95% of decisions, there's not a lot of disagreement among judges, whether they're appointed by a Republican president or a Democrat president. Now, there are those cases where genuine disagreements come into play, but that's no reason to attack judges individually or to attack the rule of law more generally, because there will be disagreements. But I hope that the Article 3 coalition can, again, contribute to the work that the Supreme Court has to do to restore the people's trust. And that is certainly one of our goals.
I agree with that. And I think on the accountability question, obviously it's up to the Supreme Court to decide whether they need to tighten up their ethical rules. They do have some changes that have been made in terms of how they have to disclose travel. The rule of thumb, I think, for judges and justices is if you made new friends because you became a judge, you need to be really careful about that. I mean, it's that's not hard, is it? I mean, but the public perception, because of some of the gratuities and the travel and so forth, is not particularly good. But I think that as Judge Davis said, the Article 3 coalition can talk about the vast majority of judges who toe the line and go about their duties without fear or favor and do the jobs they've been appointed to do. I think we can move the ball in that direction. And on the shadow docket, let me just say this, and I think it echoes what Judge Davis said. Here's the problem from an old former district judge's standpoint. If you have to stare at a couple-page decision by the Supreme Court like it's the Rosetta Stone and try to figure out what the heck the court means, you're in a world of trouble. Let me, emblematic of that, let me mention the birthright citizenship case. I mean, why can't you can walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, why can't we decide the merits of the birthright citizenship case as we're attacking universal injunctions? I mean, that's tough. So if they're going to make recourse to the shadow docket, the emergency docket, if you will, it's incumbent upon them to write more fulsomely and descriptively, because those decisions they have the force of law. Obviously, they're the law of the land, and you're going to get the cases back because you're going to have further errors because you haven't explained yourself. And I think this is something that the Article 3 coalition can talk about as well. It was interesting in the concurring opinion in the birthright citizenship case. Judge Kavanaugh basically said, "Look, folks," and he was addressing this to his colleagues in the court. "Here's what we did. We just basically said, we're going to take these cases And, there have been some wags who have said they hope that wherever the justices are vacationing this summer, that they've got hotspots so that people can stay in touch with them. And did they bite off more than they should have? Time will tell as far as that's concerned. But it is worrisome that if they're going to attack these decisions, that they haven't in every case written as completely as I think the circumstances warrant. Again, citing the birthright citizenship case, which they're going to have to deal with, obviously, down the road, and will deal with.
Yeah,
exactly right.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, and, some of this, to me, it seems like that, they're navigating their own political dynamics with a pretty unpredictable executive branch, Trump himself. And then you've also got these folks like Russell Vogt from Center for Renewing America, Project 2025, advancing a post-constitutional radicalism behind all of this agenda that I think these justices are accounting for. And they, when they're considering whether to strike down one of these or deny one of these emergency requests from the Trump administration, I think they know that they're dealing with a powder keg here, and so it's a delicate situation. But
they owe it. They owe it to the people to come out of the shadow.
Exactly.
They really do, as Judge Jones says.
Honestly, to themselves, right? They would do themselves
absolutely.
a favor. If they would be more transparent. Okay, Judge Jones, Judge Davis, I'm so grateful for your taking the time, for your leadership as part of the Article 3 Coalition. If folks watching this want to learn more about you or Keep Our Republic or the Article 3 Coalition to help your efforts, how can they get involved?
www.keepourrepublic.org is the website. We'll soon have our own dedicated website, but there's materials on the Keep Our Republic site. Keep Our Republic, by the way, was formed years back to really talk about the integrity in the electoral process, to sort of fight back against the narrative that elections are rigged and stolen and so forth, and did some great work. And this is just a natural place for Keep Our Republic to go. So there'll be more information coming out, and we're talking publicly at fora like this. So you'll see us out and about, talking about this co-equal branch of government that sometimes doesn't seem so co-equal given the tenor of the times, but actually was designed that way in the United States Constitution. It is, in fact, the third branch of three. And it is something that we'll continue to talk about.
And we are more than willing to show up at town halls, community gatherings, to meet and to engage with people, answer questions, because we really want to make the incredible sum of our experience, insights, and knowledge available to as many people as broadly as possible.
It's a great public service. Thank you once more. Thank you for joining us, for spending your time with us. To our great audience here at Midas Touch Legal AF, I am Alex Aronson from Court Accountability Action. Don't forget, stay mad, stay motivated, stay mighty.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.